The air was crisp and the moon hung low in the sky, catching eerie shadows on the dimly lit streets of our suburban neighborhood. We were a diverse bunch of ghouls, superheroes, and classic monsters, each of us eager to fill our bags with candy and explore the magical world of a Halloween night. Our parents accompanied us, but from a comfortable distance, allowing us to enjoy a taste of independence. As we ventured from house to house, knocking on doors and shouting "trick or treat" with youthful enthusiasm, we were met with smiles, laughter, and bowls brimming with candy. It was a tradition that we looked forward to every year, a chance to connect with our neighbors and share in the joy of the holiday. As the night wore on, we discovered the houses that gave out the best treats, eagerly discussing our findings with one another. We navigated through dimly lit streets, our costumes illuminated by the warm glow of porch lights, and our laughter echoed through the crisp autumn air. However, as we reached the edge of our neighborhood, we came across a house that stood apart from the rest. Its lawn was overgrown and the windows were dark, lacking the warm and inviting Halloween decorations that adorn the other homes. Undeterred by the eerie atmosphere, we cautiously approached the front door and knocked. There was a long, unsettling silence before the door creaked open slowly. In the dim light, we saw a person shrouded in darkness handing out candy. Their costume was unremarkable and their demeanor was strangely reserved. With hesitation, we said, "Trick or treat," and the person silently placed a single piece of candy in each of our bags. There was no smile, no friendly greeting, just an eerie stillness. As we turned to leave, we heard a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from inside the house. It was a voice, barely more than a murmur, saying something that we couldn't quite make out. Fear gripped us and we quickly retreated, eager to put distance between ourselves and the unsettling person. We rushed back to the safety of our neighborhood, our youthfulness now replaced with unease. We recounted the strange encounter to our parents, who listened with concern. They reassured us that it was likely just an eccentric neighbor and urged us to focus on the fun of Halloween. For the rest of the night, we continued our trick-or-treating adventure, the memory of that encounter lingering in the back of our minds. Our bags filled with candy, but a sense of unease remained, a reminder that there are always strange people out there, and to always keep an eye on your surroundings. So, I'm trans and I'm not in a safe place to transition yet. I try to dress as masculine as possible, and I have off days due to my anxiety, fear of people, and depression, where I just throw on whatever and try to avoid the world. I don't do dresses or skirts to show off my body, nor do I do anything with my hair. I don't wear makeup or dress up to draw attention to myself. I do have a very soft face and I'm overweight, and obviously I look exhausted due to a lack of sleep, and I'm also very short. This happened on a very off day for me, but adulting happens and I had to go to the bank. I had no one to come with me and I couldn't take my ESA to the bank because of the weather, and because they do not have the same rights as a service dog. I had taken my prescription to calm me down a little before leaving, but it only helped so much. There was an older bald guy at the bank and I thought nothing of him, as I was in my own little ball of anxiety. He looked Middle Eastern because of his features and his tan, and he was dressed in a nice suit. As I was waiting for the tellers to let me into the main building, he nicely pointed out the newly installed button to be let in, and I thanked him, thinking that was that. I went about my business, I deposited my check, and I was feeling alright. I didn't see anyone outside, and I stepped out into the ATM hallway for a quick withdrawal. And I turned around and he was right behind me, waiting by the main exit. I could have taken the side exit or gone back in, but I thought that I was being silly. Nope. "Hi, my name is Redacted. What's your name?" "I'm A. Thanks for your help earlier." Bear in mind that this conversation was in French and I have a stutter that grew worse and worse over the space of the conversation. I also tend to be visibly frightened when approached. "You're welcome. You're very beautiful. Can I have your number?" No thank you. I don't like to speak on the phone. I have anxiety." Come on, just give me your number. I'm sorry, I don't want to. I have an anxiety disorder. Well, that's okay, just give me your number. This was getting to be too much for me. I moved to the door and he kept pressuring me to give him my number. No matter how much I apologized or tried to get out of it, he kept talking to me. Eventually, I gave it to him out of pure panic to get away, but by some stroke of luck, he misheard me because of my stutter. He read it back to me and asked me to repeat the number, and I went with it. He finally bid me a good day and left, reassuring me that he had phoned me at 6. At this point, I thought that I was home free. I didn't live far from the bank, and I walked up a one-way street into an alley off the main street to try and avoid him. There were huge planters blocking traffic going up, so I thought that I was safe. Just as I stepped out, I heard a car rumbling through and a large white van with tinted windows sped through. On the opposite side of the alley was another one-way street leading in the opposite direction. The van nearly collided with the car going the right way up. I had been waiting for that car to pass to get in a pedestrian-only laneway across the street, so I quickly jumped back on the sidewalk. The van honked, turned around, and pulled up in front of me, blocking my way. The tinted windows rolled down and, "Hi, A, get in the car, I'll drive you home." It had begun to drizzle, but I was 2.5 blocks from home and visibly scared of him. "No thanks, I don't have to go far." "Come on, get in." This went on until he seemed to grow tired of it. He left after reassuring me again that he would call me. I was wary and I took the sidewalks this time, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a white car at the end of the block. I figured that he was just trying to get out of this little burrow and kept walking, but it didn't make sense. I had been walking slowly and he should have been out of the burrow by then. The next block, the same thing, and he was still there, following me along a street going the same way. My block was the last one that you can drive down before having to turn onto a main road, but the street that I was on went 1 block further. I ignored my turn. A gut feeling told me to keep going. I called my brother at the end of that block, mostly hidden by a big tree. I watched my street and asked him if the white van was there. As I was standing, his van slowly rolled into view at the intersection. If I had gone up my block, he would have seen me on my way back down the street. But somehow he didn't notice me, and I stood there quietly making sure he wasn't making another round. He didn't, and I made it home safe and sound, but very shaken up. I never received a call from him. First, some background. I'm a 22-year-old college senior about to graduate and start medical school in the fall. This happened when I was in elementary school, some over a decade ago. Over the summer way back then, my mom sent me to YMCA summer camp. I enjoyed going in every day and hanging out with all my friends from school who also went to the camp, but I especially loved one of the counselors, Mike. Mike was always sitting in the same spot when I got dropped off in the morning, and he would see me walk in and put a huge smile on his face. We would always sit there and play cards or some other board game in the morning while all the other kids were arriving. Once the day's scheduled activities started, Mike would always be the counselor in charge of my group. He would always be just close to me. As a kid, I didn't know that was weird. I really liked him, as I said, as I thought that he was a really cool guy as an 8-year-old. Fast forward a couple of years, and I don't remember the exact timeline. My mom and my younger sister and I were out at a state park in the area, about a half hour away from where we lived. We had just gone down there to hang out for the day, and we had have a great time in the playground, walking around the trails, etc., and then we head back to the car. When we arrived back at the car, my mom was getting my sister all strapped in and ready for the ride home, and I was getting situated in the back seat as well. Now, our car was in the parking lot, obviously, and there weren't really a ton of people at the park that day, and the lot was pretty empty. So when I noticed that there was a car parked right next to our car, I was like, that's weird. But again, I was a kid and I didn't really think anything of it. Why would this car park literally right next to us when I can see 50 empty spots from right here? Anyway, my mom was getting my sister and I all ready for the trip back home, as I said. Suddenly, the driver door of the other car opens and out pops Mike. My mom recognized him, so she just said, "Hi," and continued going back to what she was doing. Mike says, "Do you mind if I take a couple pictures of your son? He's gotten so grown and I want to remember this." My mom obviously goes, "No, you're not going to do that," and shuts the driver door and locks the car, and we leave. As we leave, I can see Mike trying to take a photo through the windows of the car. A couple years later, when I was a bit older, my mom told me more details about Mike. My mom at the time was pretty high up in a company that pairs kids with adult mentors. Adults would apply to be paired with a kid. So my mom starts telling me about how one day they were going through the applications to be a mentor, and Mike's name had popped up. Apparently, someone else had interviewed Mike and recommended him for approval into the system. My mom, on the other hand, essentially vetoed it because she obviously had known Mike from these other experiences, and she got a weird vibe from him that something was off with him. So finally, we were watching the news at dinner one day a bit later, and they start sharing a story about a man who was arrested, and they show the mugshot of the man, Mike. The charge: thousands of inappropriate images and videos of children that he both had made and was just in possession of. He was actually caught by Border Patrol, as he was acting weird when he was trying to cross into Canada. So they decided to search his car and they found a bunch of it on his computer. They alerted US authorities, who then searched his house, and they found a ton more of it. I am 100% confident that he wanted to add me to the collection. If not for my mom having a great mother's instinct and the Canada-US border, it might have happened. Summer Camp Counselor Mike, let's not cross paths again. I'd like to preface this by saying that not all mental health professionals are bad people. Good doctors and medication have saved my life. I also didn't grow up in the US, so if you see something in this story that makes you go, that's not how it works. Keep in mind that other countries might have different laws. And furthermore, this describes my experiences with staying at a mental hospital, so prepare for triggers. Alright, here we go. I was a troubled kid. I'm kind of a troubled person in general. But when I was in my early teens, specifically in this story I was 14, I was doing some bad stuff and refusing to go to school. So I was put on a waiting list for a children's mental hospital. I know now that the fact that I was on that waiting list for close to half a year should have been the first warning sign. At the time, I enjoyed being on sick leave from school, which basically meant I got to play The Sims until 6 in the morning for 5 months straight. But when I had to pack my stuff to actually go to the hospital, I of course didn't really want to go. I wanted to get help, don't get me wrong, but the idea of being away from home for 6 weeks, which is the standard time they take to analyze and watch you to give you a diagnosis, after which you can choose to pursue treatment, it scared me. I arrived at the hospital in tears, my mom carrying my suitcase for me. The nurses noticed that obviously I didn't want to stay. "Are you here on your own free will?" the doctor asked me. I shook my head. They just shrugged it off, saying they could get a judicial decision forcing me to stay there. I never go to talk to a judge. I never got to defend or explain myself. And as far as I know, my parents didn't talk to a judge either. A judge glossed over my medical history and then signed a piece of paper that forced me to stay in this place for 6 weeks. The contents of my suitcase were searched, and I remember feeling like I had just arrived in prison. The first terrifying thing happened to me on my first night. I had scratched open some of my old scabs, and when I went to the nurse to ask for a bandage, everyone went nuts. In their eyes, I had purposely harmed myself, which they couldn't prove, but okay. So what do you do when a 14-year-old mental patient does this? You talk to her, you try to help. No, you take away all her jewelry, a necklace from my mom and a bracelet from my ex-girlfriend, who at the time I still had very strong feelings for her, and send her off to the timeout room for 24 hours. The timeout room was a small room with a big window that could just barely fit a bed. If I'd use the bathroom, I had to ask a nurse to accompany me. And no joke, at one point I was in the bathroom, with a nurse standing guard in front of the door. She asked if I was doing okay, and I sarcastically responded with no. She goes, "Really?" and she ripped the door open. All of my clothes were taken from my room and kept in the front office for the time I stayed in the timeout room. So whenever I needed them, I had to go up to the front office to ask for them. But apart from having to ask for clothing and the bathroom trips, I was completely left alone in that room. No one ever came to check up on me. Getting out of the timeout room wasn't a lot better. For the first week or two, I had bad stomach problems. I would get up multiple times a night to use the bathroom, which, by the way, you didn't have one of them in your room. You had to walk down the hall to use it. And because my stomach kept me up all night, I would often not get enough sleep and end up sleeping through the day, which led to me not partaking in group activities. And instead of, waking me up, I was yelled at, and I quote, if I was up all night roaming the halls, I would be tired too. And because I didn't partake in group activities, I couldn't earn outside time. Yes, I had to earn going outside. Even just sitting on the front steps with a nurse right next to me had to be earned. So, for the first 6 weeks, I was effectively locked up, except for school and weekends where I was allowed to go home. It was blatantly obvious that none of the nurses really cared about any of the patients. They weren't even real nurses. They were more like prison guards. One of them straight up looked like they were homeless. Another one sounded like she had been a 5 packs a day smoker her life and all. And I mean all of them were chain smokers. Every free second they had, they would use it for smoke breaks. Right outside of the door too, with the doors open. So that all the other kids who were currently going through nicotine withdrawals could smell the cigarette smoke. Within 6 weeks of staying at the mental hospital, I saw a psychiatrist at whooping 2 times. Once for a general introduction and once for an IQ test. Anyone who's ever struggled with mental illness probably knows the sentence like, just pull yourself together or get over it. They're the least helpful things one could say to a mentally ill person. I've never heard it that much in my entire life. There was one instance where another patient, who was deathly afraid of spiders, came running out of her room in a borderline panic attack because she had woken up to a spider directly in front of her face. And you know what they told her? Don't be such a baby, it's just a spider. They gave her a broom for her to get rid of the spider herself, which obviously she couldn't do. My roommate and I ended up helping her out. Both of us were scared as well, mind you. But possibly the most outrageous thing happened on my second to last day. Someone had told the guards that I had tried to smuggle in something. So they pulled me out of breakfast and searched my room top to bottom. They didn't find anything, but they found one laying on the floor in the hallway, and it was even still in its wrapper. I wasn't the only patient that did this. As a matter of fact, I don't think there was a single patient who didn't do it. The blade could have belonged to anyone. They had no proof that it was mine. But of course, it was deemed that it was mine. And despite me not having any new cuts on my arm, I was thrown into the timeout room for another 24 hours. Literally my last 24 hours. And they paid so little attention to the timeout room that a fellow inmate was able to slip a letter inside the door so I could take out my frustrations. In case any of you were wondering where my parents were in all of this, my mother wanted to get me out of that place as soon as she had heard about the timeout room. But since my parents had joint custody, she needed my father to agree to it. And my father deserves a story like this for himself, but to make it short, he hadn't talked to me in over 4 years but was somehow convinced that I needed help and refused to get me out of there. My final diagnosis from that place: narcissistic neurosis. I was 14 and to this day, I had no idea how they came up with any kind of diagnosis, considering I had seen an actual doctor a total of 2 times. Additionally, this result was delivered to us, my parents and I, by the head doctor of the hospital, who I had never seen in my life, during a conclusive meeting on my last day. I was offered to stay and start behavioral therapy, but I guess it goes without saying that I politely declined that offer. Every therapist and psychiatrist I have talked to since, and trust me, there's been a few over the last 7 years, have disregarded the diagnosis entirely. Some have even laughed at it. I'm currently diagnosed with bipolar disorder, depression, and a panic disorder, and my current psychiatrist has suggested that I might suffer from borderline personality disorder. I guess the moral of the story is to always do research on the hospital you plan on getting yourself admitted to. I'm sure as heck that I hope I never have to see any of those guards, nurses, or doctors ever again.